To throw on the wheel, you are going to need a bucket of water, wire cutting tool, a sponge, a needle tool, a few wooden tools as seen here, and then some preformed balls of clay in case you mess up. Now to begin on the wheel, you need your bat wet so that the clay sticks to the wheel. So just put some water on your hand, get it nice and wet. You don't want it glistening like that though, so if it is glistening, take a towel or a cloth and remove some of that excess moisture there so that your bat looks like this. Now you want to attempt to throw down the ball of clay as close to the center of the bat as you can, giving it a few pats so it sticks to that bat. Now the first thing you're doing is centering, and to center you're going to need both your hands and the clay wet. You are going to want to use the palm of your dominant hand at the 5 o'clock portion of the clay, and your non-dominant hand is being used more as a guide for centering that clay. You see here that my clay pops off of the wheel. That means I did not get it stuck on there good enough. If that ever happens, you simply need to clean off your bat a little bit using a towel, scraper, whatever you have available to you, and you need to clean off the bottom of your clay there. You can then throw it back down into the middle of the bat, and then use your finger to create a type of seal between the clay and the bat there. Now it should stay on there nice and good. So when you're centering, as I was saying before, you want the clay predominantly touching the palm of your hand on that dominant hand. Your non-dominant hand is a guide, and it's also either pushing the clay up or down. So you can see my thumb is on top of the clay there. It's leveling out the top of that clay so that the whole clay body that I put on the wheel becomes nice and centered. I also want you to notice that my elbows, you can kind of see them, but my elbows are placed on my inner thighs to kind of stabilize those so that my hands aren't moving all over the place when I'm centering. You want your hands to be staying pretty set in place while centering, because you want the clay pushing into your hands and it forming and centering that way compared to you using your hands to form and move the clay. So the clay and the wheel are doing a lot of the work compared to the ladder there. So it's going to take you a while to perfect centering your clay. Nobody's going to center perfectly the first time they're on the wheel. Just grant yourself a little grace while you're centering until you're absolutely certain that that clay is nice and centered. And you're going to be able to tell when it's centered because you're going to be able to see that it's not wobbling when it turns around the wheel. And you're also going to be able to feel it if you place your hands over the clay as so, and you don't see your hands moving at all. That means your clay is nice and centered. Once you have your clay centered, you are ready to start opening the centered clay. To open, you want to place your thumbs how mine are placed here, and you want to begin pressing down directly towards the bottom of the bat. You want to make sure that your clay stays nice and wet, as well as your hands, and you want to Keep pushing down until you feel you're approximately 1/4 of an inch from the wheel bat. If you go down too far, you will have to restart. If you don't go down far enough, you can always keep pressing down. But how you judge how far you are away from the bottom is with a needle tool. You press it until you hit the wheel bat, place your finger where the clay begins, and that is how thick the bottom of your pot is going to be. Roughly 1/4 of an inch is what you're aiming for. Now to open to create the actual bottom, you're going to use your middle finger and your index finger and place it at the 6 o'clock portion of the clay, and you're going to begin pulling directly towards your belly button. You want to also make sure that the clay is nice and wet and your hands are nice and wet throughout this process so the clay doesn't catch or anything like that. How far you pull out is going to be dependent on how wide or narrow you want your bottom to be. But this is going to create a nice, flat, even bottom. If your fingernails catch or anything like that on the very bottom of your pot, you can use a sponge to clean up those imperfections and smooth things out. And then you can just continue to work at it until you reach the desired width that you want. Once you have your desired width where you want it to be, you are then ready to start pulling up the sides of your pot or your cylinder that we are going to be making for this video. To pull the walls of your clay up, you're going to want to place your hands as so. Your middle finger of your dominant hand is going to be slightly lower than the middle finger of your non-dominant hand. You are placing your fingers at the 5 o'clock area of the clay, and you are applying a little bit of pressure to that dominant middle finger to grab some of the clay near the bottom of the bat, and you are just pulling that straight up, not releasing or adding pressure as you are pulling up. Once you get it to the top, you are going to use your sponge to press down and even out that clay that you just brought to the top. Now viewing from the different angle, you're going to be able to see the wall actually move up, and you're going to see that with this amount there's actually a slight imperfection in it, and I did that so I could show you how to fix that imperfection. So I'm still following the same process where I am at the 5 o'clock portion of the clay. I'm placing my middle finger of my dominant hand just lower than the middle finger of my non-dominant hand, and I am just pulling that clay straight up in order to bring that wall a bit taller. You'll see that it takes me a little bit just because that unevenness makes things a bit more complicated as you're pulling up compared to if everything was nice and even and nice and centered. So I have it to where I want it now, and how you get rid of any unevenness is you use your needle tool and you're just going to cut right off of the top there the unevenness that was in your pot. You're going to use your sponge to even it back out. So now you can see that the walls of my cylinder are nice and even now, but I have to continue pulling the walls up. You're not done pulling the walls of your cylinder or your pot up until all the clay near the bottom of the bat, you can tell that it's a lot thicker than up higher. You're not done pulling until all of that is up at the top of your pot in the walls there. And how you can tell is simply by measuring its thickness with your fingers. When you're pulling the walls up, you only want your fingers at the location of this 5 o'clock in the clay. That provides for a lot more control, a lot more consistency compared to trying to move your hands all over, and you're really only using your fingers. You're not using any other part of your hand to pull the walls of your pot up. And how tall it's going to be is simply dependent on how much clay you started with and how much is at the bottom of your bat there. As you are finishing up pulling up the walls, you are going to be able to tell because all the clay at the bottom near the bat is going to be brought up towards the top. You can see that I'm cleaning things up with my sponge a bit. I'm getting rid of any excess clay. The next step is going to be to use your long, skinny wooden tool. Hold it at a 45-degree angle close to the bottom of your pot, and you're going to get rid of some clay at the bottom near the bat that's creating a curve out. Instead, you want it to kind of curve in. I can create another video that shows that a little bit better at a different angle, but that's going to make it a lot easier to get your pot off of the wheel bat, and it's just going to make things look nice and neat. Also, to make things nice and neat, you're going to use this rounded wooden tool. Again, holding it at a 45-degree angle. You're going to place your non-dominant hand on the inside and apply just a tiny bit of pressure, and you're pulling straight up just like you would a wall. And that wood tool and that angle you have it held at is going to get rid of any excess sludge, slip, clay that isn't needed on the outside wall of your clay cylinder. Taking a sponge on the inside and placing it on the bottom is going to get rid of any extra water that's in there, extra moisture that's going to cause issues when drying. And you're just going to repeat this process of cleaning up the sides of your clay cylinder until you feel that it is at a level of craftsmanship that you can be proud of. Taking your time to really ensure that things are nice and neat and all of that. Once you are finished cleaning up your pot, you are ready to take it off of the wheel. You're going to want the wheel stopped, and you are going to want to use your wire cutting tools, hold them nice and taut, and place them directly on the bat and pull towards you a few times. Clean off your hands and pull that cylinder you just made right off of the wheel. You're then ready to place it on a separate board for drying so that it can be kiln fired.